Assalamualaikum, welcome to a brand new video. In today's video, I'd like to read to you a chapter from An Introduction to Greek and Latin Paleography by Sir Maundy Thompson. This is a book published by Oxford and Clarendon Press in the 1912. So this was written before 1912, obviously. And so there's a chapter here on vellum, parchment and vellum, right? So just to give you the front page of the book, right? Introduction to Greek and Latin Paleography, right? By Sir Edward Maundy Thompson. And so recently I've been revisiting ancient, well, it's ancient, but literatures written in the past century or so, because if you look at scholarly bibliographies, they actually recommend that one consult literatures of the past as well. And so recently I've been consulting a lot of the literatures from the past and comparing their argument or whatever they say to literatures of the present day, contemporary literatures. Right? And you can see that there's a lot of difference in there. The way people think in the past is different than the way people think today. And so it's very interesting to hear what they write, our ancestors wrote. So this is page 28. The introduction of parchment or vellum, as it is now more generally termed, that is to say, skins prepared in such a way that they could be written upon on both sides, cannot properly be called an invention. It was rather an extension of or improvement upon the old practice. The common story as told by Pliny in his Natural History, book 13, chapter 11, on the authority of Varro, runs that Eumenes II of Pergamum, wishing to extend the library in his capital, was opposed by the jealousy of the Ptolemies from Egypt, right, who forbade the export of papyrus, hoping thus to check the growth of a rival library. So Ptolemy doesn't want to export papyrus from Egypt because Ptolemy is the dynasty. Ptolemy's dynasty, the capital is in Alexandria, and they do not want to help Pergamum, which is in Asia Minor. Right? Some people say it is in Italy, like modern Pergamum, right? A place in Italy. It could be that also, but that is much probably more correct. But there are some people that say that Pergamum actually refers to parchment, right? And so the origin of parchment is in Asia Minor. So there's some, just to let you know, there are things like this. So, but Italy is much more correct, because Pergamum or parchment might have originated in Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, but Pergamum as a place is in Italy. And so the Ptolemies, they do not want to help his rival build their libraries, so he wouldn't export papyrus, right? They wouldn't export papyrus because the Ptolemies are actually a dynasty. Because the library in Alexandria during the time the Ptolemaic period, they were a very grand library in Alexandria, right? In Egypt, north of Egypt or lower Egypt. And so the Pergamene king, thus thwarted, was forced to fall back again upon skins, and thus came about the manufacture of vellum. Right. Whatever may be the historical value of this tradition, at least it points to the fact that Pergamum was the chief center of the vellum trade, the center, we may conclude, of the revival of an old trade and improved manufacture. Right. And so the name membrane, which had been applied to the earlier skins, was extended also to the new manufacture, which however afterwards became known as Pergamena. Okay. The title Pergamena first occurs in the Edict of Diocletian in AD 301. Okay. Next, in the passage in Saint Jerome's epistle quoted in the footnote. So he quoted the epistle here in the footnote. The word Somatheon, which afterwards designated as vellum manuscripts, as opposed to a papyrus roll, had reference originally to the contents, such as manuscripts being capable of containing an entire work or corpus. Right. So just as papyrus is able to contain the entire work, so does skins. Right? But if you study a little bit further, if you read a little bit further, it's actually expensive to produce skins more than papyrus. The animal whose skins were found appropriate for the new manufacture was generally sheep, goats, and calves. Others, such as swine and asses, provided materials for particular purposes. Asses is like referring to donkeys, right? And even rarer creatures such as antelopes are said to have been selected for more delicate and costly volumes. It is only reasonable to assume that any skin of suitable quality would be brought under manufacture. But in the course of time, a distinction arose between the coarser and finer qualities of prepared skins. And while parchment made from ordinary skins of sheep and goats continued to bear the name, the finer material produced from the calf or kid, or even from the newly born or stillborn calf or lamb, came to be generally known as vellum. Right. The finer kind, it has come to be the practice to describe them as of vellum, although in some instances they may be really composed of parchments. Right? So now they're trying to differentiate between parchment and vellum. Right? There's also a group of people that says vellum is only referring to goat skin. It's mainly made out of goat skin, because goat skin quality is much better than sheepskin, so on and so forth. Right? So, but if you read generally in literatures, when scholars refers to parchments or vellum, they use it interchangeably. Right? And some scholars just use parchment, and some scholars just use vellum. But in an academic sense, if you're arguing about just the material without going into the technical details, then we refer to the whole thing as parchment. Right? So that's basically what I want to read from this book, just to make you aware of this book as well. If you are interested in paleography, if you are interested in textual criticism, or how ancient books or how ancient Bibles and even the Quran was actually made, then this is a book of interest for you. Right? You'll not be interested in all the technical details because this is about Greek and Latin paleography, but nevertheless, this actually adds value to your research if you are, if this is the field that you are going into. Anyway, so in my previous two videos, I don't know when this video will be up, but I've made videos in the past before whereby I show you the ancient materials. I showed you leather skins, right? I showed you papyrus. I showed you like ancient made paper with decal edge, and I also showed you the reed pens, right? So reed pens are being used mostly by Muslim scribes, right? And they're also being used by early Christian scribes. But in the Middle Ages, Christian scribes and Jewish scribes, they changed to quill pen, made out of goose or geese or ducks or hen or eagle, right, feathers. Right? They would shape the sides. I don't have a quill pen to show you as an example. So these are the pens that are being used by Christian monks and scribes, right, as well as by Jewish scribes in the Middle Ages, right? But in the past, if you look at paintings of scribes in the first 5 centuries of the Christian era, they would use reed pens, the long reed pens which I've shown you, made out of reed plants mostly. Right? Bamboo was introduced later on, but they are mostly made out of reed plants. Right? And in the Middle Ages, when papyrus wasn't used anymore, we have a lot of our materials of the Bible of the New Testament and the Torah, even the Torah today, the Israel Commission Torah, they are written on parchment. Right? Some of them are written on paper, right? Paper rolls, because Torah, when we say about Torah, we're talking about the first 5 books of Moses, right? If you know about Jewish Torah, people still commission Torah to be written in Israel, and then it was shipped over to synagogues around the world. So Israel commissioned Torah. They were written on long paper rolls. They will present the Torah, and then, for example, if it's a wedding or something like that, then the people will finish writing the Torah. Right, the family members, or even the person getting married himself, will actually finish writing the Torah. Right, when I say finish writing the Torah, everything have been drafted. They just, like copy, like fill up the lines in black ink. Right, some of them write themselves. Right, yeah. So if you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, they are written on parchment. Right. If you look at ancient New Testament manuscripts, for example, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, they're written on parchment. Early Qurans were written on parchment. Right. The earliest Quran, we have scraps written on wood, on stones, on rocks. Right. Some have survived, some have not survived. But we have early Quran, for example, the Sana manuscripts, as well as the Birmingham Quran, the top copy Quran. They're written on parchment. So we know, based on the materials that are being used, that this is actually an early Quran. Right? And we are not talking about the script, we are talking about the materials. The script could be different, because today I could write a Quran based on the Hijazi script, which is an early script as well. Right? And so based on the material itself, it doesn't mean that the Quran, the text, was actually written earlier, because we know of the past whereby there's a lot of palimpsests. Palimpsest basically means that the parchment, right, the initial wording, the text, have been erased, right, and a new text have been written on top of it, right. And so this is what we call palimpsest, a reused parchment. So for example, here I have a parchment. Right? This is a goat skin parchment. It's huge, it's untrimmed. Right? It's untrimmed, so it fills up the entire book, the entire screen here. Right? So this is the flesh side, this is the hair side, or the fur side, and this is actually the flesh side. Right, let me just zoom in. You can see the flesh side. In the videos that I made in the past, I've shown you that there are actually a lot of flesh here, right? A lot of underneath, the skins underneath, that have not been shaved. And so the difference between parchment and leather that people use to make bags, or people use to write on the Quran on as well, right? The difference is that the flesh side, they have mostly been scraped off. Right? I've shown you in my previous videos of the same nature, whereby there's a lot of flesh, a lot of remaining fur or something like that, which have not been scraped off, right? Which is why I mentioned that that is not a high quality parchment, but that nevertheless is a very good quality leather, right? Because leather are made out of animal skin, so does parchment. What makes them two different is that parchment have generally been thinned out. The flesh have all been removed, mostly, right? And this parchment that I have here is not of the premium quality. Right? Premium quality parchment, you have everything here very smooth, right? And it is almost very expensive. It is very expensive, especially if you want it prepared in a traditional way. because this parchment that I have here is made by hand, prepared by hand, as per the ancient way of doing things, using vernellum, so on and so forth. But if you want a very fine parchment prepared by hand, whereby every imperfection, like for example, we find in a lot of in very expensive medieval Christian New Testament manuscripts, as well as Bible, right? We find very delicate and very expensive, whereby the vellum that have been used is very fine. Those will cost an arm and a leg. It is almost as if buying a Ferrari in a modern day. Right? So it was very expensive to make. It was only made by royalty or something like that, or someone must be very rich, right? And so that is a vellum of parchment that I don't see myself buying, because it already costs an arm and leg to have this, right? Just for to write, and just for these video purposes. Right? So yeah. There's a shop in America that sell this sort of parchment for $100 USD, and that gives you the price range if you want to buy vellum or parchment of some quality, right? And so mostly how would they do it is that for Europe, right, the way the process is being done in the Arabia is different than how it is done in Europe. So Europe in the Middle Ages, parchments are being written whereby you have the flesh side facing the hair side, right? So there's a lot of inconsistencies in how you write, right? But as we get towards the modern period of the 1500s, right, you start to find whereby scribes or monks or person preparing the parchment, they actually fold the parchment in a certain way that you get flesh side, and hair side, hand side. So it's more consistent, right? And so there are ways to fold the parchment. Now, obviously, parchments like this will need to be cut, will need to be prepared. And so what they will do is, for modern scribes, for modern artists that uses parchment to produce artwork, right, the way they treat parchment is different from a Christian scribe or a Muslim scribe. We're not going to care about how modern artists use like paintings and so forth, because they have a different process. But for scribes, how scribes would actually prepare their parchment is that you take a sandpaper, or you can take a pumice stone. Right? So to prepare your parchment for writing, you need to actually scrape the material first, right? You scrape it, right, so that the ink that you use will actually so that it will be smooth for you to write, right? Depending on the grade of the parchment. Normally on the hair side is not a problem, but on the skin side, because of all this, right, inconsistencies, which 95% of the parchment that you will buy, unless you're super rich, you will buy this sort of quality, right? No one in their right mind today will buy a parchment that is very smooth, because that will cost them an arm and a leg, and it's not practical, right? Unless you are very rich, right? And so you have to scrape this material, and then you will write it over, right? And you also need to use a non-acidic ink, right? Because there's a lot of manuscripts in the past whereby they use acidic inks because they don't have knowledge of all this, right? And so it actually, over the years or decades, you will have holes in your manuscripts, right? For example, you have a lot of holes, or one big hole, because the acidity of the ink will actually eat the skin, because you have to remember this is actually flesh, right? And so if you put acid on flesh, over time the acid will eat the flesh. You will eat away the flesh, and so you'll end up with a lot of holes in your manuscripts. Right. So there are a couple of reasons why there are holes in your manuscripts. One, as I've just described to you, that they use acidic inks, and then it actually creates a hole in your manuscripts, or where you actually wrote using the acidic ink. So acidic ink are mostly being come from colors like green, right? Some other colors, and so because of the materials or the material substance that they use, and so you find a lot of Latin medieval manuscripts that have illumination. They actually have a lot of holes in their illumination. That is because the inks that they use. So after a certain period of time, like the 13th and 14th century, where people actually learned that no, you can't use acidic inks to write on skin, and so they move away from acidic inks, and so and then you start to find that manuscripts no longer have holes. Now, for manuscripts that have holes, later on, it could be because of bugs or pest infestation, right? Whereby the manuscripts have not been stored properly, and then you have bugs living in the manuscripts, and some of them actually eat away. For example, book lice today. The reason why a lot of books are damaged is because book lice will actually eat the ink. Not the ink, the glue that are used for binding, right? So book lice eat the glue, and some of the some of the pests like spiders and so forth will also damage your book, right? They will not actually bite your books and so forth, but you have a lot of spots on your books, right? So that is one of the book damage. So to care for your manuscripts, like for example, if you are a scribe and you decided to invest in Parchment and decided to write the entire New Testament on Parchment, or the entire Quran on Parchment, right? So a couple of things: never get your parchment wet, right? Because you have to understand that parchments are skins, they are leather basically, and when they are wet, right, it will become soggy, and you're gonna have problems because it will shrink as it dries down, right? And so you're never going to use watercolor to paint this whole thing. All right. Again, like I said, the way artists prepares their parchment is different than us. If you are interested in scribal activity, so never get your parchment very wet because it will shrink, right? And always wipe away smudges, right? Because if, for example, if you smudge your parchment, right, especially on the hair side, you're gonna have problems, because on the flesh side, because the way you erase parchment is that you can't use an eraser. Obviously, you erase writings on parchment using an eraser, unless using pencil, it will not work. So you need to use a sharp material like knife or pumice stone to actually scrape away the top layer of the skin, right? And every single part of the parchment, no two parts of the parchment have the same GSM, so to speak. It could be that this part is thinner than this part, or this part is thicker than this part. So there's no consistency, right? It is impossible to get consistency with parchment. So if you look here, you can see that this is a very thin side, and down here is a very thin side, but somewhere around the middle here, right, is thicker. Right, so most probably this is about 150 GSM or 200 GSM. Somewhere in the middle here is 250 GSM. Right? You get what I'm trying to say, right? And some parts are maybe like 100 GSM, and that is because the way parchments are being prepared, because they are being scraped away using a vernellum, right? So they scrape away, scrape away, scrape away. Sometimes, depending on the pressure that you use to scrape your parchment, right, the scraper, they will remove more skin than they wanted. Right? And so that is why you have the inconsistency. Now, so if you see the side here, right, you can see, maybe perhaps this side will be better. You can see that this side actually used to be damaged by water. Right, this side. Right, if you know anything about parchment, or you have studied parchmentry before or researched into it, you know that as your parchment gets damaged by water, it will start to wrinkle. Because it wants to shrink. Right. So these parchments have been damaged by water before, but the maker managed to dry it off before it affects this parchment further. Right. So yeah, you can see here, this part have been scraped too much. You can actually see it under the light, right? Because if I put my hand here, yeah, now you can see my hand there, right? This part. Whereas if I move my hand below here, this part, now you cannot see, right? You can see the shadow, but now here you can see literally. Right, so this part is thinner than the rest of the other part because looking at it, it has been over scraped by the parchment maker. Right. So, like I said, it's very hard to get parchment that is consistent. It is not possible to get parchment that is consistent, and it will cost you an arm and a leg and a head even, right, to get consistent parchment. So yeah, if you are looking at a parchment of this quality, right, I would say maybe this is medium grade quality, right, because of the hair side. I don't see any hair here in this parchment, so a lot of the hairs have been removed. Right. This is very expensive. Like I said, there's a shop in America that sells you for about 100 USD for parchment of this size. Right, probably it's like there are different sizes, but yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, hope this video actually provides you some thing to ponder upon. And the reason why I'm very interested in all of this is because I've been looking at ancient manuscripts of the Quran, of the Dead Sea Scrolls, as of the New Testament, and it just fascinates me because these are all pieces of history. Whether you're a Muslim, Jews, or Christian, you have the Bible today or the Quran today, and you can buy them cheaply, easily, even digitally. It's free. But in the past, if there's no tradition of preserving the words, if there's no tradition of actually writing and copying, then the history would have been very different. Right? I mean, for the Christian tradition, for the New Testament, people have been copying the text, but they also change the text. Right? You find this in the Torah as well. The book of Isaiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls is different than the book of Isaiah today. The book of Acts, for example, in the Western manuscripts is different, is much longer than the book of Acts in the Alexandrian manuscript. Right? And so people have added words, they have removed words, so on and so forth. Right? But the point is that they actually write down these words. They wrote down these words. And they use parchments, they use papyrus, and then much later on, with the advent of Gutenberg's printing press, they use paper. Right? And today we have digital Bibles, digital Quran, digital Torah. Right? So there's always an evolution. And if we don't appreciate the past, right, we don't learn from the past. And if we don't learn from the past, right, we are neglecting the powerful history that exists, and we take things for granted. At least that's the way I see it. Some people will see it differently, right? And so it is actually a nice experience to imagine and also practice or engage in the works that our predecessors engage in, right? In the case of the Quran, that is to write the Quran, to copy the Sana manuscript, right? The palimpsests, to copy the top copy manuscripts, right? And if you're a Christian, then you might want to copy the medieval illuminated manuscripts, right? And if you are a Jew, you might want to copy the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So that actually brings you closer to your tradition. It makes you interested in learning more about your religion or other people's religion, right? And then at the end of the day, it actually benefits you, because if you write down, if you copy down, right, you might learn the language, you might learn the vocabulary, you might learn, you might improve your creativity, right? And so I will see you in my next video. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.